Prison is often described as chaotic, loud, violent, unpredictable, but that image is misleading. Because behind the noise, behind the shouting, behind the steel doors and razor wire, prison is not disorder at all. It is precision. Nothing inside a prison happens by accident. Not when you wake up, not when you eat, not when you shower, not when you speak, not even when you are allowed to be silent. From the moment an inmate opens his eyes in the morning, every single hour of the day has already been decided, not by him, but by a system designed decades ago to do one thing extremely well: control human behavior without constant force. This documentary is not about riots. It is not about escapes. It is not about gangs or contraband. This is about something far more powerful: time. In prison, time is not neutral. It is not just something you serve. It is engineered, rationed, weaponized, and enforced with ruthless consistency. Every routine, meals, count, work call, rec, lockdown, lights out, exists for a reason. And that reason is not convenience. It is compliance. Because when you control a person's time, you don't need to touch them. You don't need to shout. You don't need violence. You simply let the clock do the work. Across the United States and many prison systems worldwide, correctional schedules follow a pattern that looks harmless on paper: structured, organized, efficient, even necessary. But inside the walls, that structure slowly reshapes the human mind. Men and women stop thinking in days and weeks. They stop planning. They stop choosing. They begin to live by bells, buzzers, lights, and doors. And once that happens, control becomes automatic. Former inmates often say the same thing when they're released. They don't talk about fear first. They don't talk about fights. They talk about how hard it is to decide what to do with their own time again. Because prison doesn't just lock your body. It trains your brain. In this film, we are going to break down exactly how that happens, hour by hour, system by system. We will expose how prison schedules are designed, why they are enforced so strictly, and how small, repetitive routines gradually strip away independence, urgency, and identity. You'll see how waking up at the same unnatural hour every day weakens autonomy. Meals become psychological markers, not nourishment. Silence is used as punishment. Waiting becomes the default state of existence. And how unpredictability is deliberately mixed into routine to keep inmates mentally off balance. This is not theory. This is policy. This is practice. And most importantly, this is intentional. Because once inmates stop asking, "What do I want to do today?" and start asking, "What happens next?" the system has already won. By the end of this documentary, you'll understand why prison officials often say, "If you control the schedule, you control the institution." And why nothing, absolutely nothing, inside a prison is random. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. The first act of control inside a prison does not involve bars, chains, or handcuffs. It happens before an inmate even speaks a word. It happens the moment their eyes open. In the outside world, waking up is a decision. You choose when to rise. You decide whether to sleep longer, hit snooze, or start your day early. In prison, that choice is removed immediately. Wake-up time is not about rest. It is about submission. Across most correctional facilities, inmates are awakened at the same hour every single day, regardless of age, health, fatigue, or mental condition. The lights come on. Doors rattle. Boots move down the tier. A voice echoes orders that no one questions. This is not because the prison day needs to start early. It is because predictable exhaustion makes people easier to control. Sleep deprivation, even mild, consistent deprivation, reduces impulse control, weakens memory, increases irritability, and lowers resistance to authority. Prison administrators understand this. So the system is built to interrupt rest just enough to keep inmates functional, but never comfortable. And the most important part? You are woken up whether you slept or not. Noise throughout the night is constant. Metal doors, radios, yelling, toilets flushing, officers conducting counts, lights flicking on and off. Sleep becomes fragmented, shallow, unreliable, yet the wake-up call never changes. This conditions the mind to accept a powerful message early. Your physical needs are secondary to the schedule, but waking up is only the first layer. Immediately after, inmates are required to move. not freely, but in response to commands. Stand for count. Sit. Wait. Move again. Everything is timed, but nothing is explained. Why now? Why this order? Why the delay? Those answers are irrelevant. Because prison does not train inmates to understand. It trains them to obey without understanding. Morning count is not just about numbers. It is a ritual of authority, standing silently, often half awake, while officers visually confirm bodies reinforces the idea that presence itself is monitored. You are not just confined, you are accounted for. Day after day, week after week, this ritual chips away at autonomy. Inmates stop waking up with intention. They stop thinking about what they want to do that morning. Their first thought becomes survival inside the routine. What's next? Where do I need to be? How long do I have? That shift matters. Because once a person stops planning their own morning, they stop planning anything meaningful at all. Breakfast follows, but even that is not relief. Meals are served at times that rarely align with hunger. Early enough to disrupt natural rhythms, fast enough to discourage conversation, and rigid enough to eliminate choice. You eat because the door is open, not because you're hungry. If you don't eat, the tray disappears. No second chance. No later option. This reinforces another rule. Needs do not negotiate. For new inmates, the first few weeks are especially brutal. They wake up disoriented. Their bodies haven't adapted. Their minds are still resisting. But the schedule does not adjust. So the body adapts instead. This is how the system wins early. By the time an inmate has been inside for a few months, their internal clock no longer belongs to them. They wake up minutes before the lights come on. They feel anxious if routines are delayed. Silence feels wrong. Waiting feels normal. That is not accidental. Psychologists refer to this as behavioral conditioning through routine dominance, the gradual replacement of internal decision-making with external cues. Prisons don't need to threaten violence to enforce this. The clock does it for them. And once waking up is no longer your choice, the rest of the day becomes easier to control. Because a person who starts every morning on someone else's terms is already behind, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically. This is only the beginning. The rest of the day tightens the grip even further. In the free world, food is comfort. Choice. Routine built around preference. In prison, food serves a different purpose. It is not primarily nourishment. It is timing. Meals inside prison are among the most strictly controlled events of the day, not because of nutrition, but because they act as anchors in the inmate's mental timeline. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner divide the day into segments, not for convenience, but for conditioning. Inmates don't ask what time it is. They ask, did chow run yet? That distinction matters. Because when time is measured by permission instead of clocks, independence erodes. Meal schedules are intentionally rigid, but not humane. Lunch might come before hunger sets in. Dinner might arrive hours before the body expects it. Late-night hunger is common and irrelevant. The message is subtle, but consistent. Your body does not set the schedule, and the way meals are served reinforces this lesson further. You do not approach food freely. You wait. You line up. You shuffle forward when told. You sit where you're assigned. You eat within a time window that feels rushed, even when the day itself feels endless. Talking too much can cost you your tray. Standing up too early can bring discipline. Complaining does nothing. Food is not something you enjoy. It is something you process quickly before it disappears. This creates a strange contradiction that prison systems rely on heavily. The day is long, but meals are short. That imbalance trains inmates to rush pleasure and endure discomfort. Over time, this changes behavior. Inmates begin eating faster than necessary, even years after release. They hoard snacks. They associate silence with safety and speed with survival. These habits don't come from hunger alone. They come from control through scarcity of time. But the real power of meals lies in what surrounds them. Waiting. Before every meal, there is waiting. After every meal, there is waiting. Sometimes you wait in line. Sometimes you wait in your cell. Sometimes you wait without knowing how long it will last. Waiting is not a side effect of prison. It is one of its core functions. Because waiting forces the mind into a passive state. You can't plan. You can't move. You can't progress. You just exist, alert, but powerless. And when waiting becomes the dominant activity of the day, inmates stop expecting forward momentum. They stop anticipating outcomes. They live in a permanent state of not yet. This is where time becomes heavy. Hours don't pass evenly. They stretch. They compress. They lose meaning. Inmates learn quickly that asking, when is useless. The answer is always the same. When we say, movement between locations reinforces this even further. Walking from a cell to chow hall may take 5 minutes physically, but mentally, it can consume an hour. Doors open late. Lines stop unexpectedly. Counts interrupt movement without warning. Everything reminds inmates that motion does not equal progress. You can be moving and still be going nowhere. This is intentional. Correctional systems understand that people who feel stalled are less likely to resist. Frustration without release leads to resignation. Resignation leads to compliance. And compliance is cheaper than force. Over time, inmates stop thinking in tasks. They think in windows. How long until the next call? How long until count clears? How long until doors open? Life becomes a series of checkpoints controlled by others. Food, something deeply human and personal, becomes just another marker on the prison clock. It tells inmates where they are in the day, not in life. And once a person's sense of time is tied to institutional routines instead of personal goals, the system has achieved something powerful. It has replaced purpose with procedure. By the end of the second chapter of the day, inmates are no longer fighting the schedule. They are floating inside it. And the most dangerous part? This feels normal. Because prison doesn't crush resistance all at once. It dissolves it slowly, between meals, between doors, between moments of waiting that never seem to end. And the deeper the day goes, the less visible the control becomes. Next track button, your move. In the free world, work gives structure to time. It creates momentum. It gives days a beginning, a middle, and an end. In prison, work is something else entirely. It is not about productivity. It is not about rehabilitation. And it is rarely about skill. It is about occupying the mind just enough to prevent resistance, while never allowing real progress. Most prisons divide inmates into two broad groups: those who are assigned jobs, and those who are not. Both groups are controlled, just in different ways. For inmates with jobs, the workday appears structured. Kitchen duty, laundry, janitorial tasks, yard crew, maintenance, clerical work, factory lines and some facilities. On paper, this looks like routine, responsibility, even opportunity. Inside the walls, it feels hollow. Work assignments rarely match an inmate's abilities or future needs. Wages are symbolic at best. Advancement is minimal. And the rules surrounding prison labor are rigid, unforgiving, and often arbitrary. You work when you're told, where you're told, for as long as you're told. Refusal is not negotiation. It is discipline. The hours stretch in a strange way. Tasks are repetitive. Time slows down. The brain enters a state somewhere between boredom and numbness. This is not accidental. Repetitive labor reduces mental stimulation. It quiets critical thinking. It creates a rhythm that mirrors the larger prison schedule, predictable, controlled, and externally dictated. Inmates learn to lower expectations. They stop asking why. They stop imagining alternatives. They focus on finishing the shift. And once a person's goals shrink to just get through today, control becomes effortless. But what about inmates without jobs? They experience a different kind of pressure. Forced idleness. No work assignment does not mean freedom. It means endless empty time, and that is often worse. Days stretch without markers. Hours bleed into each other. There is nothing to finish, nothing to complete, nothing to measure progress against. The mind turns inward. Anxiety grows. Frustration builds. Thoughts loop. This is where prison time becomes psychologically dangerous. Humans are not built for prolonged idleness under surveillance. When a person cannot act, cannot improve their situation, and cannot escape observation, the brain searches for stimulation anywhere it can find it. Arguments, obsessions, rumors, conflict. Prison systems understand this balance very well. Too much work creates exhaustion. Too little creates unrest. So the system keeps inmates hovering in between, busy enough to prevent rebellion, idle enough to prevent growth. Even recreation periods follow this logic. Rec time is scheduled, limited, and closely monitored. It is framed as a privilege, not a right, and it can be removed instantly. This keeps inmates grateful for scraps of normalcy. A basketball game, a short walk, a conversation under supervision. These moments feel valuable not because they are abundant, but because they are scarce. Scarcity increases compliance. Over time, inmates internalize a dangerous belief. Any deviation from the schedule is a threat. When lockdowns happen, even if they are sudden or unexplained, many inmates don't resist. They retreat. They wait. Because the system has trained them to associate stillness with safety. Even creativity is controlled. Writing, reading, learning, all depend on access, permission, and timing. Libraries have hours. Classes have schedules. Lockdowns erase plans instantly. Nothing belongs to the inmate long enough to feel permanent. This is the illusion of purpose. Work exists, but it does not build a future. Free time exists, but it does not feel free. Every hour is filled just enough to prevent collapse, but never enough to allow progress. And this has lasting effects. Former inmates often struggle outside prison not because they lack skills, but because they've been trained to wait for instruction, to move only when directed, to see time as something imposed rather than chosen. They miss deadlines. They feel overwhelmed by options. They become anxious without structure. The prison schedule doesn't end at release. It follows them. This is the hidden cost of institutional time control. Prison does not just punish crime. It reshapes behavior. By the time the workday ends, or fails to exist, the inmate is already mentally tired. Not from effort, but from managed stagnation. And as evening approaches, the system tightens again. Because nights in prison are not for rest. They are for reinforcing silence. As the day inside a prison winds down, something changes. Movement slows. Voices drop. Doors begin to close. This is the phase many outsiders assume is calm. It isn't. Night in prison is not about rest. It is about containment. This is when the system applies one of its most powerful tools, silence. Lockdown begins in stages. First, work details end. Then recreation shuts down. Then movement between units stops. Eventually, cell doors close, sometimes for the night, sometimes for longer. The timing varies slightly from prison to prison, but the effect is the same everywhere. The world shrinks. Inside a cell, sound behaves differently. Every noise echoes. Every cough, every footstep, every distant shout feels closer than it should. Silence becomes oppressive, not soothing. And that is intentional, because silence inside confinement does not relax the mind. It amplifies it. Thoughts grow louder. Memories replay. Regret sharpens. For inmates, nighttime is when the schedule finally pauses, but the control does not. Lights remain on in many facilities, dimmed but never fully off. Officers' conduct counts throughout the night. Doors rattle. Flashlights sweep cells. Sleep is interrupted again and again. This creates a condition psychologists call hypervigilant rest. The body is lying down, but the mind never fully powers off. True rest becomes impossible, and when people cannot rest, they become easier to manage. Night counts serve more than security purposes. They remind inmates of a constant truth. Even in silence, you are being watched. There is no private time, no unobserved moment, no mental space that truly belongs to you. Even conversations are controlled. Talking after lockdown can bring discipline. Whispering is monitored. Any noise can draw attention. This teaches inmates a dangerous lesson. Silence equals safety. Over time, many inmates stop speaking altogether during nighttime hours, not because they have nothing to say, but because speaking feels risky. This conditioning carries weight. Humans need expression. When it's suppressed repeatedly, emotions don't control themselves. They store. Anger becomes internal. Sadness becomes heavy. Fear becomes routine. Prison systems understand this trade-off. A quiet unit is considered a successful unit, not because inmates are calm, but because they are contained. Lockdown also destroys one final illusion: time ownership. At night, there is nothing to do but wait for morning. No tasks, no distractions, no choices, just hours to endure. This stretches time in a unique way. Minutes crawl. Nights feel endless. And the knowledge that tomorrow will be the same makes the waiting heavier. Some inmates sleep excessively to escape consciousness. Others lie awake, counting hours they cannot influence. Neither is healthy. And yet, the system does not adjust. Because the goal is not wellness. It is predictability. A silent inmate is a manageable inmate. A tired inmate is a compliant inmate. An isolated inmate is a controllable inmate. By the time lights-out routines end and the unit settles, the inmate's day has been fully consumed by external control. They woke up when told, ate when allowed, moved when directed, worked or waited as assigned. And now, they are quiet because silence is enforced. The full cycle is complete. And this repetition matters. Because when days repeat without variation, identity fades. People stop distinguishing one day from another. Birthdays pass unnoticed. Weeks blur. Months lose shape. Life becomes a loop. And inside that loop, resistance doesn't vanish through force. It disappears through fatigue. By nightfall, most inmates are not thinking about escape or rebellion. They are thinking about survival. How to make it through another identical day. This is where the prison clock becomes absolute. It doesn't just schedule behavior. It erases alternatives. And as long as the schedule holds, the system remains stable, even when nothing else is. But the most important effect of nighttime control doesn't appear immediately. It appears later, after release, because silence, once learned as safety, becomes difficult to break. And that is how prison time continues working long after the doors open. The most effective systems of control are the ones that don't need to be enforced forever. Prison understands this. That is why the true impact of institutional time does not end at release. It begins there. When inmates finally walk out of the gate, the bars are gone. The uniforms are returned. The doors open. But the clock stays. Former prisoners often describe an unsettling feeling during their first weeks of freedom. Not fear, not joy, but confusion. Too many choices. Too much unstructured time. No one telling them what happens next. After years of living inside rigid schedules, freedom feels chaotic. Simple decisions become overwhelming. When to wake up, what to eat, how long to sit still, what deserves attention. These were never choices inside prison. They were instructions. And when those instructions disappear, the mind struggles to adapt. This is known as institutional dependence, a condition where individuals function well under strict control, but falter when autonomy is restored. It is not weakness. It is conditioning. Inside prison, time trained behavior relentlessly. Outside, that training doesn't automatically reverse. Former inmates often wake up early without meaning to. They feel anxious when plans change. They become uncomfortable with silence or overwhelmed by noise. They struggle to manage long-term goals because prison taught them to think only in short intervals. Count to count, meal to meal, day to day. This makes reintegration brutally difficult. Employers expect initiative. Families expect emotional presence. Society expects self-direction. Prison trained the opposite. And when former inmates fail to meet those expectations, the system quietly blames them. Not the conditioning. Not the years of controlled time. Not the psychological erosion. The person. This is how recidivism feeds itself. Not through violence. Not through chaos. But through maladapted time perception. Many former inmates return to prison not because they want to, but because prison time makes more sense than free time. Inside, life is predictable. Outside, it is not. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths about incarceration. Prison does not prepare people for freedom. It prepares them for more prison. And the clock is the reason why. The system doesn't need to punish forever. It only needs to train long enough. Once a person has learned to surrender control over time, they are easier to manage anywhere, or easier to fail. That is why prison schedules are defended so aggressively. Why reform focuses on facilities, budgets, and security, but rarely on time autonomy. Because changing the schedule would mean changing the power structure. And power does not reform itself willingly. Nothing about prison time is accidental. The early wake-ups, the rushed meals, the endless waiting, the hollow work, the silent nights. Each piece plays a role. Together, they form a machine that doesn't just restrain bodies, it reshapes minds. By the time an inmate leaves, the system has already accomplished its most important task. It has taught them to live by someone else's clock. And once that happens, control no longer requires walls. Prison is often judged by what we can see. The walls, the bars, the razor wire. But the most powerful part of the system is invisible. It's the clock. By the time an inmate leaves prison, the punishment has already done its deepest work. Not through violence, not through fear, but through time engineered to remove choice. Day after day, the system teaches one lesson over and over again. Wake when told, move when allowed, eat when permitted, speak when safe, wait when unsure. Eventually, waiting becomes life. And when that happens, control no longer needs guards or gates. It lives inside the person. This is why prison reform is so difficult. Because reforming buildings is easy. Reforming schedules is not. Changing how time is controlled would mean changing how power works. And power rarely gives itself up. Nothing inside prison is random. Not the early mornings. Not the rushed meals. Not the endless waiting. Not the silence at night. Every hour is designed to shape behavior. Every routine is designed to train compliance. Every day is designed to look ordinary, until you realize how much of yourself has been quietly taken away. The most uncomfortable truth is this. Prison doesn't just punish crime. It reprograms time. And when time is no longer yours, neither is freedom. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.